Control. What a looker. But recording footage can be a pain, I'd know. Especially in competitive multiplayer games like Control, or Control, where you're worrying if things are actually being recorded, fiddling about with hotkeys in the heat of the moment, then wading through the Library of Alexandria to find the right clip. Somewhere in which will be the right moment. Today's sponsor is Outplayed, which does all that for you. If it's interesting, it records it automatically, and you decide what's interesting, so your time saved, and your storage space, and your frustration. Edit the clip right there in the app, send it to your friends with a few clicks of your mouse. Outplayed's free, links in the description. Fair warning, this one's gonna be weirder than usual. 5 years have passed, and Control has changed. It's twice as big, yet now a small part of gaming's best connected universe, and it has become the cult classic that it was always gonna be. Control was always going to draw me back, to see what's new, and to give it a fairer, truer, and closer look. Control is about a woman who believes in magic, searching for a building that no one can see, where she hopes to find an organization that doesn't exist, because her imaginary friend told her to. But Jessie is not crazy. She watched the Federal Bureau of Control take her brother when they were young and they saw something they weren't supposed to see, a crack in the solid grey of ordinary life. She was saved by her friend, Polaris, her formless guiding star, and now Jessie wants to find her brother, but deep down she just wants a way in, to the freedom and wonder of the world of magic. Control begins with our foot in the door of the oldest house. We're finally here. What will we find? Do you like what you hear? An escape from the mundane, an entrance to a life of magic. It's one of our oldest fantasies, runs wide and deep. It's one we've all indulged, and it has come at just the right time. The 21st century, the new world of concrete and glass, where we are estranged from magic. We are scientists, skeptics, and materialists. We are distant from nature, and though we might be fascinated by black holes for being the one thing in the universe that seems to break all the rules, or radiation for its capacity to make monsters and behave like a curse, magic does not feel as though it could be a part of this world. So most takes on Control's fantasy leave this world behind, finding themselves somewhere older, but not Control. Control doesn't believe in escape. Inside its Hogwarts, the things that characterize modern life only intensify, and the wondrous is given a home in our world, the world that drove it out. Control bridges the widening gap between reality and magic. It makes magic feel real, plausible, close. For that, it is one of the strongest and freshest takes on this old fantasy, and among those with the most to say. It is only minutes before Jessie finds what she came for. There's an elevator that wasn't there at first. The janitor overhears her thoughts.
Artie the janitor is a friendly face in my book.
Better than somebody with no face at all.
She stands now over the dead body of the last director of Control, while the board, a pyramid who speaks in static, convened in the astral plane, votes her the new one. And in a way that only half surprises her, Jessie feels a profound sense of relief.
You know what? I'm happy. Happy to be here.
The simplest thing that makes Control's magic feel real is that Control is really realistic, as you can see. In fact, it's more realistic now than ever, because 5 years on, some of us can actually run the ray tracing. This was early RT, 20 series tech, and you can tell. The noise problem isn't exactly subtle in the blackest parts of the house, but the growing pains seem like specks in the face of the fact that few games have ever benefited from real-time ray tracing as much as Control, in part because of its environments that are simple and mostly reflective, and in part because of its unique interest in feeling real. So the floors light up, small details are given dimension by shadows, and flashing lights are spice to the spectacle of combat. We gain drama of the red of the hiss piercing deeper, a stronger contrast between light and dark, or a vast gaping shadow to emphasize the immensity of a thing. And every window becomes a mirror, but the reflections don't overwhelm the scene. It is the difference between being alone in the hotline chamber and being surrounded by your ghostly echo, and the matter meets the standard set by the light. Concrete, wood, glass, skin. Sometimes there's a certain waxiness about the faces, but these are materials with the kind of definition that by looking at them, you know how they'd feel to touch. There is a pronounced physicality to the house, a clarity of sense, and I've seen it in other games, but there's nothing quite like Control, because in the house, it's not just skin deep, the realism of destruction. This world was made to crumble, in intricate detail, even things you'd never expect. A vast concrete table can be completely dismantled rock by rock. Punish the walls enough and a chunk may fall loose, itself asking to be used as a bludgeon for a pillar or a desk or something seductively delicate. Dust makes clouds, rains from shaken ceilings and repaints the floors. Lights flicker, blinds bounce. Control convinces you it's real. Well, mostly. Apparently, the Bureau makes their fax machines from adamantium, and also certain kinds of desk, and the bathroom sinks, and the trash cans, which never does feel right when they're standing next to something that can be broken that should be harder to break, which they basically always are. Things don't land right either. Launch a fridge, and it hits like a fridge. Let a fridge fall, and it lands like it weighs 5 pounds. Those problems considered, I'd say the destruction is brought down to about a 9.8. Tragic. The world becomes the central means by which Control realizes its power fantasy. Do anything, pretty much anywhere, and the world will make it significant. Miss, and it still feels good. 'Cause man, at least you fucked up that guy's office. In dividing the world into an endless array of physics objects, Jesse's powers can have second-order effects. Given the 5 years they've had to fix it, it's a shame that there is still, at times, an awkward delay on Evade's destruction effects. But the cool part is that when you evade, things break. And not just the things you evaded through, also the things you evaded near, suggesting the presence of a pressure wave. Levitate and anything light or loose below is pushed aside, portraying a powerful downward force. Launch and debris is drawn into a gravity well, grounding launch in a physical reality. It's cool. And real. And it's cool because it's real. You don't feel like you're drawing on an authored force of convenience whose name is magic. You feel as if you're pulling on the strings of physics, the forces we know and feel in our real lives. And it is in this way Control convinces us of magic. It sells you on the Force, and the notion that if telekinesis really existed, this is what it would be like. Yeah, you should probably play this game. In Control, magic is surrounded by everything magic isn't, to highlight and heighten both extremes, to make it known what about the modern world makes it hostile to magic, on the other hand, to display what magic means in a modern context. It's contrast. That is Control's central creative strategy. But being real isn't the only thing that characterizes modern life. The FBC, after all, is a place of science. Its biggest sector is the research sector, where magic is proven, repeatedly, made legitimate by modern conceptions of legitimacy. You see? It was always real, but they were hiding the truth from you. Much of Control's lore draws from real-world conceptions of magic, and real attempts of science to explain magical phenomena. Resonance, entanglement, synchronicity, Jungian notions of the collective unconscious. It's the oldest trick in the book to make a fictional world feel plausible. Just so happens that the oldest house has more to gain from that trick than most. The FBC is also a bureau. A bureaucracy, an institution based on routine, protocol, and hierarchy, a manifestation of man-made power, and it is power that paints the walls. Overwhelming greys and whites, plaques, portraits, and the black pyramid that looms down, always from above. Brutalism, vast masses of concrete that define Control's architecture, that create an impression of weight and immovability. It is hard to be intimidated when you're playing as Jesse Faden, and yet, apparently not impossible. It is the opposite of magic, of what magic will twist it into, bending its supposedly immovable walls into spirals and circles, moving the most solid thing like water, a contrast that is both impressive and somewhat disturbing. It's useful to Control that the Bureau don't use tech made any later than the 60s, because back then, tech wasn't elegant. It was large and cold and heavy. A smartphone might as well be magic, but a terminal? That's a machine. In its quainter spaces, the FBC is an office, a dream of white-collar workspace, somewhere familiar to many a 21st century Joe. What is the opposite of that? The daydream, the mystical realm of the perpetually bored, something that exists outside the rules, unintimidated by the notion of a boss. And here they are. Chaos, red, represented as a fluid. Co-workers hang, possessed, chanting an endless, meaningless incantation. They got what they dreamed for magic to invade and lift them from routine. Sometimes it's you who makes the image complete. The graceful floating that characterizes Levitate makes Jessie the counterpoint to her surroundings. Join the possessed, relieve the weight of order. The Bureau forms a violent contrast with the forces it seeks to control, even when that force is you. A battle illustrated in every frame of play, as clear from a glance as from the story itself. Control's art is like art, man. Meaningful in many of the ways art in a gallery is meaningful, as it describes a deep human truth and provokes us to think. Perhaps about the fragility of our systems of power. Maybe about our estrangement at the hands of modern life from the spirit, from magic. In the oldest house, every magical thing must take on a bureaucratic identity. Incomprehensibility is represented with sensor keys and the sound of a bad signal. Runes become signs. Rituals become protocols. Magical wisdom is written on post-it notes and bulletin boards. Gods and kings given corporate titles, director and board, or the tenets of corporate graphic design echoed in Control's minimalism. This extends to the spaces themselves. Dead letters, an office, but only in the foreground, only in name and purpose. Beneath that, it's a church, with arches, an altar, and desks like pews, a symmetry maintained throughout. This is a mailroom, but really, it's a cathedral. Computers, or monoliths. The hallways are less subtle. They look like the gateways to an ancient tomb. Whether grand or granular, you're drawn to consider the truth of these comparisons, that some of the old ways might still be with us, and it is in this way Control once again makes magic feel close to modern life. Perhaps most obviously, though, is that it makes Control look good. Bureaucracy is boring, but it's not boring when it's actually a Warhammer citadel. In the house, boring is the skin, not the flesh. Control is never boring. It carefully composes its imagery, keeping visual noise at a minimum, balancing colors and light and dark, succeeding by every measure of the science of beauty, and ultimately arriving at a unique visual style. A proprietary blend of modernist magic, minimalist aesthetics with retro tech, along with a general affection for brutalism and surrealism. The only thing that feels like Control is Control. It is beautiful in a way that is original, and that's useful. To draw the eye, to keep it there, to motivate exploration, to make every corner turned an intrinsic reward. But my praise for the art isn't over just yet, because there is another contrast. Control is also the kind of art that only games can be. The contrast of order and chaos is one we, as Jesse Faden, participate in. Environments are neat, symmetrical, and squeaky clean, designed in absolute opposition to what you'll make of them as an inevitability of play, be that combat, or mucking about with a destruction sandbox, which will become an activity as natural as walking, because the destruction sandbox is really that good. In that sense, you play as entropy. You make a glorious mess, and in doing so, you enact a kind of revenge on this place. Jesse is a willing ambassador for magic, rebels against these would-be oppressors like tagging a bank with graffiti, or skateboarding down a subway rail. By doing it, we connect with it, and we indulge in perhaps the most widely relatable aspect of the fantasy of making magic real. To use superpowers to blow up your workplace, or maybe your school, or whatever this place means to you. But chaos isn't just the aesthetic result of combat, it's the mechanical foundation too. Remedy toyed with cover mechanics for a short period of early development before making the wise choice not to repeat Quantum Break's mistakes. Instead, Jessie's defense would be her movement. Move or die. She controls responsively, another vast improvement over Tim Breaker's Temporal Tales, and one that would usually come at the cost of animation fidelity. But Jessie makes any such compromise seriously difficult to notice. Remedy's animation work does an exceptional job of capturing the physicality of gameplay. She stumbles from falls, flinches, and throws her body forward as part of launch. The exchange of forces at play in combat are made as visible on Jessie's body as they are on the puppeted corpses of the Hiss. It's reactivity, the most important element of making a third-person shooter feel good. Remedy have always known that. In fact, it was them who pioneered it. And now Max Payne's stepdaughter is here to prove it again. Whether it's a bullet or a fax machine, the Hiss will make it feel significant. Health has an important role to play too. You lose it really quickly, but you also gain it back quickly by shooting drops of energy out of the Hiss. To heal then, you must be near the enemy. It's this, combined with the fact that the service weapon much prefers close range, that heavily encourages Jessie to stay amidst the chaos and to be relentlessly aggressive once there. If there's a problem with all this chaos, it's the distortion effect that emanates from the Hiss. It's too big, it takes too long to fade, it's too obtrusive. The problem isn't that it affects your performance, because launch has an aimbot so you can just shoot through it. The problem is that reactivity is the best thing about Control, but you can't see that reactivity if and when your screen is smeared in Vaseline. It's a problem. To be fair though, it is one problem. Control is one of the best feeling third-person shooters ever made. So that's good. And in embodying chaos, both visually and mechanically, combat becomes another performance of contrast against the order of the Bureau. Fuck, even the structure of Control works that way. Rebellion isn't inherent to the open world genre, but when your open world is a looming manifestation of order and hierarchy, freeform exploration can become a counterpoint. In a way, Control delivers the childhood fantasy of sneaking through your school at night, being somewhere you shouldn't be. me. I think that does this game a lot of favors. Control is one of the most artistically effective third-person shooters ever made. You really should play this game. I'm no longer asking. It's no secret that the foremost inspiration for The Oldest House was The House of Leaves, one of the founding novels of the new weird genre that centers a house that cheats. By our rules at least, halls are too long, impossibly long, doors lead to the wrong place, even the pages play the game, and so does The Oldest House. In concept, in the lore, but in practice, what's remarkable about The Oldest House is how unlike The House of Leaves it really is. The Oldest House is normal, consistent, not that weird. It can't be. It's not allowed to be, because it's thoroughly explorable, and being built on a Metroidvania structure, some optional paths demand that you come back later, with a higher clearance card or a different ability, so players are going to return to old locations at some point, when they feel like it. And when they do, the way back still needs to be the way back. It's for this reason we never actually get to experience a house shift. To get back, you won't be using a GPS, nor quest markers, because Control doesn't have them. You're expected to navigate the house with diegetic information alone. You have a map, and your directions are those laid out in the world. More than any other, it's this part of Control that causes the most friction with a normie-pilled casual. People have a tendency to get lost in this game, and that was inevitable, because most games don't work this way, and friction is the price of doing anything outside the norm. If you like art, it's a price worth paying, but only to the degree you actually had to. The problem is, the information Control provides often isn't enough. There is a gap that must be filled with perception, a spatial awareness, a developing mental map. In the long term, a mindset, and in absence of an appropriate tutorial to instill that mindset, an early encounter that could only be solved with environmental cues, the way people learn their lesson is all too often a painful period of getting woefully lost. Having reckoned with that hurdle, the end result of Remedy's risk is twofold. Firstly, immersion. As we traverse the unknown, our experience aligns with Jesse's. You behave as if you were really there, fully inhabiting the newcomer, drawn forward by clues and what catches the eye. The other is realism, because that's realistic. Ultimately, you will form a heightened spatial awareness of The Oldest House, an impression of solidity and truth to the space, which is also realistic, and in a particularly useful way, because in most video games, transdimensional fuckery, impossible spaces, and knowing implicitly that there's not really anything outside those walls is par for the course, taken for granted, not in Control. Which is why, when something wrong does happen, it lands with the significance it's supposed to have. Teleportation means something when you have a mental map to be disrupted. It can be disappointing that The Oldest House is not the fluid world it's made out to be, but it is precisely its solidity that makes a jump cut powerful. The basic loop for gameplay in Control is progressing towards the next control point, whilst clearing rooms of hiss and exploring the environment. There is a lot to explore in the rooms themselves, but there are also different ways to go, which is where you'll find most of the game's side content. Nowhere is Control's beauty more useful to it than here. It's worth having a look, just for the looking part. Control points are Remedy's take on bonfires, where what's taken is not so much the gameplay significance as the convenience of them. They balance fast travel, provide an in-universe context for respawning, and neatly tie the upgrade systems together. They're smart, they work, but they come with the classic downside of mandating boss runs, which is a big problem when you die in an encounter that lives on its spontaneity. You come back a second time, you watch it follow the exact same script, and that makes it look like it's following a script. Sometimes it's a matter of fact, not impression. Fridge duty. Philip can't look away or the fridge gets violent, but we don't get him out in time. We try to cleanse it, following a spot of vengeance, and we are summoned to a blackened plane ruled by a being like the board, the former. Die to the former, and Philip comes back. But the light of Christ is swiftly retracted, as we then listen to the fridge turn Philip into hummus again, and wait for the former to arrive, again. See you later, refrigerator, piece of shit. Patches have moved boss spawns closer to the boss since the last video, but that doesn't solve the awkward reunions. Sorry about that, former, just had to make a quick run now. Where were we? Oh yes, throwing boxes at each other. Control often struggles to translate the weird into game mechanics. The Anchor, Mold 1, and the former are good boss fights, in every way apart from how you fight them. They have one attack, or two, but no mechanics that would serve to complicate your response, which will be throwing a torrent of rocks at them until they fall over. They're simple and predictable. They're not that fun, nor fitting with a character of something alien. I excuse Essage from this generalization because being a reflection of Jesse, her mechanics live up to her concept. And I also excuse Mr. Tomasi for being unpredictably shit. He is a normal enemy with a big health bar and an army of other normal enemies who make this fight the hardest fight in the game. Tomasi is so very far beneath Remedy. But when it comes to difficulty, the problem is more often being too easy. Bosses don't scale very well, but the Anchor and Mold 1 hit you with a comeback later roadblock when they're first accessible, so you tend to do them fairly late, which can lead to a sub 60-second curb stomp. Control's boss fights are deeply troubled, but their problems aren't limited to the boss fights. In the pit, a deep threshold of the house lost to a spreading mold, a humid maze of what is otherwise solid Control content, we are tasked with finding 5 research samples. What? Is that it? Find 5 turds?
Gross. Umbrelle's gonna owe me for this.
For Artie, we have janitorial tasks such as going to a place and shooting 5 putrid mold scrotums, or going to a place and shooting 5 putrid mold people, or shooting the same piece of shit we've already shot in the campaign, or talking to 5 plants.
I hope those nasty hiss haven't been bothering you too much.
I forgive that one because it's funny. In both cases, the context fits. It's janitorial work, it's scientific inquiry, the bread and butter of the FBC. The problem is not that they undermine so much as they underwhelm, but there are things beyond that defense. Enter the furnace. Doesn't it seem like it's looking at you? There's an account nearby of a woman who heard it speak to her, pleased to be fed that she couldn't resist. So, we feed it. Find all the barrels, throw all the barrels. Not very interesting, but hey, it's build up, right? For the cool thing that will happen at the end? Ah, 2 skill points. Cool. The furnace is exceptional. Shit, and also in the sense that Control's altered items usually represent the best of its side content. Altered items, otherwise known as SCPs, that is, of all Control's inspirations, the most loved and known. Secure, Contain, Protect is an online collective of fiction centering supernatural entities that are categorized and discussed from the perspective of a clandestine military organization, SCP, created to do as their name instructs. Sound familiar? It was a smart inspiration. What the SCP universe offers is a lens of plausibility. The entities, as do Control's altered items, largely take the form of everyday things. A ship, a stairwell, a furnace, each mundane on the surface, but hiding an unknowable and often horrific connection to the other side. Some of these altered items compose the foundation of Control's world. The secret to transdimensional travel is an American motel. The hotline to the dead and the distant is a bakelite telephone. Jessie gets her powers from binding to altered items, and she walks within one too, the oldest house itself. It is through their apparent mundanity that SCP, like the FBC, allows you to indulge the notion, firstly, that magical and monstrous things might exist all around you, even in your modern life, and secondly, that the only reason you never find out is because there's a grand conspiracy to hide it from you. The FBC is filled with such accounts, be it physical evidence taken from the scene or documents written almost exactly like authentic SCP entries. Those that were captured now serve their time in the Panopticon, a supernatural prison that is for us not unlike a zoo, and some of them are causing trouble that is for us to solve. The traffic light, red, yellow, green. You can guess how it works. The challenge is controlling your impatience and choosing cover that will fully shield you from the red light. The nature of the thing is the encounter. It's unique, and for that, it is fitting and appropriately whelming. The mirror. Mirror on the wall. How do I open this fucking wall? The mirror will tell you. You read its SCP entry, from this you learn its nature, and that provides the clues you need to solve the puzzle. Fantastic. The astral spike, an extraplanar predator that hunts thoughts and consciousness, a frenzied ball of mass and flickering light that slowly rages towards you, and it can't be stopped. It's bordering on scary. Your only hope is to lure it into a prison, one of the smartest encounters in the game. The mannequin is different. It stares from across the twisted hall. You approach, and then they're everywhere, and you won't know what to do, but you'll notice something, that whenever you can't see them, they turn to look. It's a chilling realization, and the only thing to do is to stumble onto the one true mannequin before you shit yourself. It is an example of how the absence of formal mechanics can be a better move than poor mechanics. The rubber duck is similar. There's a chase, but there's no game to it. It is literally taking the piss out of you. The challenge is tolerating its mocking quacks. Control's side content is troubled. It has source, it has stunning visuals and cool ideas, but it reeks of Control's greatest foe, the tight budget. Sometimes that could still lead to effective gameplay. Other times, it means 3 bosses that play the same and 3 quests that have you shooting spots. I think the greatest success of the altered items is tonal. It is this notion that anything could be supernatural that lays a sense of suspicion or curiosity upon everything in the Bureau. Nothing can be immediately dismissed as normal or mundane. this is a useful aspect of Control's atmosphere, and Control is a good SCP game, which makes a strong contribution to its fantasy of plausible magic. But there is an important difference. SCP is a horror universe. Control's is not. It's also not the opposite, whimsical and wonderful like Hogwarts. Indeed, Control isn't interested in prescribing any particular emotional tone to the supernatural. Instead, it wants to let the supernatural speak for itself. Perhaps the best way to explain what that means is to show you how Remedy try not to speak for their creations. No introductory cutscene imposes a fearful perspective on Mold 1 or the Anchor. There's no intimidating title, the description atop the health bar is written in plain lowercase font, there's no dramatic soundtrack in the background. In fact, there's rarely any dramatic soundtrack in Control. Music does not speak for the action or for the weird. There are unsettling elements about the former in Mold 1, but they are not inherently monstrous beings, and Control offers no condemnation of its enemies. You aren't meant to hate them, not even the hiss. It's not evil, it's a virus, and its nature is to propagate. It is Control's belief that different things are just that. Different. Indeed, the defining characteristic of its alien minds is difficulty to communicate, and the absence of a prescribed tone allows nuance to more easily come through. Conventional boss music makes it harder to consider the possibility that a boss might not be deserving of their fate. There are exceptions, the standard hiss combatants. It's harder to say you aren't imposing a perspective on the hiss when an incomprehensible viral sound for some reason turns everyone into a different kind of stereotypical Goosebumps monster. Zombies, ghouls, witches. It is probably no coincidence that these exceptions are the least interesting elements of Control's art. To the degree to which the rule stands, though, it is, I think, the great success of Control's approach to the weird. Its emotional palette can take on strange, small, conflicting, and unexpected flavors, and that's pretty useful to a game about confronting truly different things. It makes them feel real, plausible, in a way a game that locked its gods and aliens into the man-made emotional restraints of a more distinct genre never could. It gives Control emotional breadth. It can feel like anything and it will always fit, making for a world that it is harder to get bored of. And it's a damn good thing for a mystery game too, because you can't really know what the next thing is going to feel like. With Mulder's soul and Scully's form, Control is a game defined by mystery. When we walk through those doors, we're here to find Jesse's brother, Dylan, but that's not what's really driving us forward. Dylan is a faceless abstract, a notion, and he remains that way until we find him. His absence causes Jesse pain, but none that Control is interested in connecting us to. What's more interesting is the question of why they took him. What weren't he and Jesse supposed to see when they were children in Ordinary? What did they do to him? All we have are questions, and at first, questions are all we find. The director dead by his own hand. Why? What's the deal with Artie or the board? How'd the hiss get in? What does a sound want? And what about Jesse's imaginary friend? Control throws you into the deep end of the unexpected and it's got you hooked. But all of that happens in hour 1. After that, the main story, the one driven by cutscene and character, takes a back seat, and the main method of narrative delivery shifts to the environment. Story via exploration, like Dark Souls. Yeah, I said it, that's analysis, but it's also a fact. Remedy wanted a new approach for storytelling, one that would work for a non-linear game, that would allow a player to enter a space in any sequence at an unknown time and nevertheless receive a narrative. Hence, the item descriptions, and all the ways information can be received without an event presently occurring, or an actual character needing to be there. Some things are instantly digestible. The primary visual fixture of a space. There are enemies, workplace bulletins, post-it notes, computer screens. There are documents that demand a committed read. And thanks to a modern setting, there is video and audio, technologies that allow NPCs to leave behind their ghosts. In fact, the conspicuous absence of the star of the show is another of Control's big mysteries. Where is Dr. Darling? There is a balance of levity through things like Darling and the inherent comedy of interrogating a rubber duck.
Quack, if you can understand my words. No response.
With darker tones, the accounts of those who never returned. There is a balance of reading, listening, watching, and viewing firsthand, of highbrow conceptual stuff with interpersonal drama. And this varied breadth proves useful to work against the sheer amount of lore from wearing out. Some elements of lore are self-contained, an audio log that tells a complete story. But most elements of lore are not. They are pieces, snippets, perspectives, with a lot of space intentionally left blank, in the literal form of a redacted bar, or by simple means means of omission, so we gain information, and with it, we gain new questions. Another balance, a careful balance of getting more and wanting more. A drip feed of information in which you almost see the impression of a conventional reward loop, where small nuggets of satisfaction are distributed at an irregular but frequent pace. Learning can be quite addicting in Control. Remedy prove highly effective at giving you enough to make you want to know what they didn't give you. A document tells a story, with an important character whose name is hidden. Someone disappears. I wonder where to. You walk into a testing chamber filled with sands blown in from someplace else, from a looming wall where a door was once open. Control's consistent aesthetic brilliance makes for some very strong hooks. Mechanically, this works smoothly. Experientially, this FromSoftian design model evokes the feeling of always being somewhat lost, of being surrounded by the unknown, like the SCP's, Control's storytelling becoming an important component of its atmosphere. Another of Remedy's important successes is how effectively they concentrate questions and information, keeping things interesting by layering one idea inside another, communicating with subtext and subtler implications. Take a document. It says stuff, but some parts are redacted, a literal blank space, an implicit question of what's behind it, but also of who put it there. Let's say you know what the blank term is because it fits in length and concept and there's only one thing it could be. The board. Who would want their involvement covered up? There's an answer to that. There's the way the board speaks, struggling to talk in the terms a human would comprehend, so it provides alternate translations, which have alternate implications. Favorite/current director? Does that mean it only chooses directors it likes better than the last one? Or does it call every director its favorite director? Ugh, I bet you say that to all the girls. The ocean view is its own question, but look closer. The posters changing each time you visit, like they're trying to tell you something. The strange symbols on the doors. 3 pulls of a cord to get there, 3 pulls back. Why? Why 3? What is this place? And why is it framed? There's the way Darling looks off to the side at times and stumbles through certain lectures with an unexplained anxiety. There's Threshold Kids, a TV show made for Jesse's brother to educate him on paranatural concepts.
I'm not allowed to go outside anymore.
And in Threshold Kids is a second statement, that the Bureau was disturbed enough to think this fucking voodoo conjuring-ass nightmare was child-friendly. Taken individually, the realization of all the different kinds of lore and control is exceptional. If you can look past the lifelong trauma, Threshold Kids is a pretty good puppet show, and perhaps there is a special convenience in Control being as realistic as it is, that live action doesn't feel out of place. So, on a limited budget, Remedy could plonk a camera in front of Matthew Peretta and perfectly capture a full 30 minutes of the game's best performance. Darling's got a sizzling charisma. There's a sitcom kind of humor in his awkward interactions with his less awkward co-workers, and each lecture is kept brief. Remedy meet the challenge of making boring arse science lectures neither boring nor arse so effectively that it doesn't even occur to you that the challenge would have needed to be met. It also benefits from being interactive, in the sense that the projector is a physics object, so you can just take Darling with you. It's a shame the same can't be said for audio logs or radio interviews, which cannot be transported or otherwise listened to on the move. With reading, you control the pace. With video, there's visual engagement. But in demanding that you sit here twiddling your thumbs for the audio logs, Control creates a high likelihood that people are just going to keep on moving. I did. Enough to feel guilty about it, and when I didn't, I always had to resist the temptation to. The weakest link among Control's information formations is the hotline. Allow me to properly introduce you. Sometimes you will come across Trench's ghost, slipping through the cracks of death, speaking in broken prose to guide you forward. Perhaps it should not be surprising that a projected image so effectively evokes the sense of a consciousness projected from a distant place. This is the first of many times Remedy use a shift in art form to portray a shift in dimension, and it's beautiful. Mirroring Control's art style, I would often find myself aligning Jesse to perfect the image. The connection is weak, a bad signal, and some things are lost to noise. Unless you turn to the hotline, the Whitelight telephone connected to all of time and space. Google Translate for Lovecraft and friends. The problems begin with how you use it. Menu, collectibles, hotline. What the fuck? It's unintuitive for one, and it literally removes you from the experience. It's even got a fucking video player UI. There is no sense that you're interacting with an object of power, let alone that you're still rooted in the world of control. Nothing makes you appreciate watching a lecture with Jessie inhabiting the world quite like watching a YouTube video from a menu. When a call becomes available, there's a small notification tucked down to the side of the screen, and there is no ring, which makes it surprisingly easy to miss. That is, most of Trench's characterization and most of Jessie's communications with the board. The hotline is a comprehensive fuck-up, a shame, an anomaly, both in the sense that the delivery of Control's lore is otherwise a comprehensive success, and in the sense that the problems with Control's lore usually have nothing to do with the lore itself. Its biggest problem is that it is burdened with making up for Control's story. So let's talk about Control's story. What does that aforementioned backseat mean? It means an overwhelmingly materialistic story, driven by plot, not by character. One where most of what you do is not because of who you are, but because there is a physical problem that needs to be solved. The door's jammed, fix it, bitch. It's one where the characters are not affected by what happens in any terms other than physical terms. You were in danger, now you are safe. It's one where those characters have very little going on beneath the surface, and also on the surface. One-note personalities and nothing human beneath it. The Bureau presents a profoundly boring cast. Pope is a researcher. Her turn-ons include research. She's excitable, a proto-darling, and sort of charming that way. Marshall is a soldier lady. According to her co-workers, she's really tough. As far as you'll see, she stands around looking tough. Underhill is a bit rude, Langston is a bit weird, and then there's this guy. I'll give you $1 million if you played Control and you recall this man's name. 3, 2, 1, exactly. The answer was Arish. He is a man who is nice. During in-game conversations, there is no motion capture. Body language is stilted while facial animations range from passable to some kind of proto-stroke that looks like they're at a dentist exam. It can be profoundly uncanny to watch characters who look that good animate that poorly, which sure as shit doesn't help with the matter of being able to connect or even wanting to engage with Control's humans. Of all the ways to get information in Control, talking to people was the one I avoided the most. This leads me to the controversial matter of Jessie Faden. I liked Jessie Faden, but liking her was the easy part. She is warm, kind, and sometimes funny.
I hope your day has been productive, little plant. That really works, huh?
And Courtney Hope plays her without the assured silky sharpness of the average video game heroine, but instead with a youthfulness and, crucially, a surprising normalness that proves remarkably effective at making a woman who has lived anything but a normal life feel relatable and real.
My turn. Should I lie?
Jessie Faden. I'm just visiting.
I should have lied.
Someone to identify with and ground ourselves in. It is also that unpracticed normalness, the faint quiver and distinct youth in her voice.
She led me to you. I call her Polaris.
That connects us to the truth, as the natural cool of the average protagonist does not, that her strength and perseverance are not effortless or to be taken for granted. We are told that beneath the determined hero we play is a troubled child, but it would be easy to forget if Courtney Hope did not keep that part of her present. It makes Jessie much easier to connect to. It helps that Jessie is the living embodiment of the fantasy Control sells the player. We both want the same thing. A sincere passion for all things magical is Jessie's defining trait. It is what motivates her, and it is what makes her strong. Jessie is cool, not because she is skilled or tough or fearless, but because her passion drives her past her fear, because she is willing to reach out to the unknown and connect to it. And I love that about her. I loved playing someone who was cool in that way. And I love that this distinct characterization allowed Jessie to be such a thematically resonant counterpoint to all that surrounds her.
Being pretty good with altered items isn't standard Bureau procedure, man.
He doesn't know us very well.
And because the game Control delivers on the fantasy Jessie embodies so well, everything you do is therefore a fulfillment of Jessie's character. To rush towards a demon clock that might be deadly, to throw a bench through an office or search for secrets in its scattered files. For the experience of the player to align with that of the character is a crucial component of immersion, and it helps keep what Jessie thematically represents present in your mind. 5 years ago, I and too many others criticized how fast Jessie warms to the magic of the house. I retract that and class it as a blatant misreading. The actual believability problem is the speed with which she accepts violence, shooting people with her magic Glock. There was no indication Jessie used to do side jobs for the cartel, but this has become one of Remedy's signature problems. You might have noticed that I'm speaking almost entirely about foundational elements of Jessie's character. it's true. I liked Jessie, I liked being her, and I was interested in how she'd react to the things and people in the house. But to succeed as a character in the main story, you need more than a solid foundation.
Did I lose you there for a moment?
Control won't give her one. It doesn't seem able. In part, it's that Jessie achieves her central goal, her deepest need, the moment the game starts: proof and wonder. In part, it's that it's exceptionally difficult to do great characters with a plot that is unwilling to test them. Her stats are tested, her ability to fix doors, but not her character. It's hard to overstate how serious a lacking this is. The story doesn't do anything with the characters inside it. There are other good characters in Control, but what connects them is their inability to address what Control lacks: emotional engagement. Astral Pain, the Phantom Director, Dr. Creatine, and Artie, the god/fish/janitor, succeed as mysteries and as presences, not as human beings. We want to know more about them because they are so compellingly strange. It's not often you'll encounter a Finnish janitor who reads minds on the side, nor a hard-boiled detective type who talks to the elder gods, but their sole purpose is to be interesting and to tell us interesting things. Darling and Trench left the building before the game began, and as spirits now, they are merely fated to guide you on. The coin flips, and we're brought back to mystery. Control's story establishes Control's central mysteries, but it doesn't show much interest in advancing them. This isn't an escalating series of revelations and deepening mysteries. You start in the dark, and for the most part, you stay there. This can be frustrating, particularly in combination with the character side, because what it amounts to is the sense that the story is going nowhere. It also causes problems for the lore, ones that Remedy suffer from that FromSoft have not. In Dark Souls, the larger mysteries of the world bear almost no relevance to anything current or important for you. You're there to kill the 4 big guys and link the fire. Everything else is tangential, and a useful upside of that approach is that conscious engagement with the lore can only be motivated by pure curiosity. There is no sense that it is necessary. Things are different in Control, where the larger mysteries of the world are directly relevant to Jessie, what she's doing and why she's doing it. There is the sense that having answers is important, and therefore the sense that engaging with the lore is something I should do. I am still curious, but it is joined by a pressure, and that's why, in moments when my curiosity was running low, I would force myself to read, to listen, as if it were homework, because I figured, where else is Control's narrative substance going to come from? This sense of mine was too often proven correct. An excellent example is the ordinary AWE. Here, we walk into Jessie's past through a recreation of her childhood town, where every single thing, every name, object, every detail that we didn't already know is hidden away in audio logs, in documents, in lectures. From what's part in the main story or instantly digestible, we learn that Ordinary is a town. Was it worth the wall staring? Fuck yeah it was, but I wish I didn't have to make that calculation. The sense of should whittles slowly at the joy of exploration and Control, particularly with time, because it's with time that the reality of the central narrative stagnation settles in. It's with time that the actual number of lore things to interact with increases. It's with time that the parts of the oldest house you're exploring become more relevant to the central narrative. And so it's with time that the sense of should intensifies. For these reasons, in the research sector in the early game, this problem is minimal. But in containment, in the late game, it's quite significant, even enough to have a serious impact on the pacing. If you want to get anything from Ordinary, or the Prime Candidate program, Control can take on an incredibly staggered character, split between short periods of forward motion and long periods of perusing the interactive wiki. In these parts of the game, Control's storytelling kinda sucks. There is a further element, the element of trust. This is crucial to any story driven by mystery. It is impossible to physically point to, and yet if you've ever played a game like this before, then you know its significance. People are conscious of how far it's reasonable to think, and if they don't think it's likely the developers thought that far, then they're probably not going to think that far either. People know they probably won't get things right, but they need to believe there's a chance they could. It's this that makes the game real. People engage with lore as much as they trust it, and trust is difficult to establish. In 2019, I didn't trust Control. I didn't trust it because of its central narrative, because I figured if you can't write a compelling character, if it's too much to ask for the plot to have momentum, then what's the chance you can realize a complex web of backstories or an unseen chess game of higher forces? I feared that much of this world was weirdness and nonsense disguised as mystery. I told 600,000 people as much. I was wrong, because I now have the answers I once thought did not exist, and of those I don't, I trust that they're out there. Why? paying attention, YouTubers, the fact that more answers now exist because Remedy have made more things, and most of all, an incredibly generous helping of faith to tide me over until my trust was earned. For the part of what I said that was born of ignorance, I'm sorry. But even now, I recognize in Control what made me distrustful. Control's story sucks, which sucks for Control's story, but to an unfortunate degree, it sucks for all the other stories in Control too. It casts a shadow of doubt, and a harmful pressure to do things the central narrative won't. I love this fucking world. I loved exploring it. 5 years later more than ever, but I understand why some people lost the magic. That used to be me. Control 2 has some problems to solve. So, Control is one of the best feeling third-person shooters ever, but what will sustain that experience over a long period of time is its mechanical strength. Jesse, we have to cook. And we're off to a good start, because there are a number of interesting things to be done with launch. Every launch expends a limited pool of energy, so it is in your interest to line up launches that'll hit more than one enemy. 2 birds, 1 forklift. That places a strong incentive on smart positioning. A second kind of 2-for-1 is rooted in the way objects float towards you when you select them. Those objects can hit enemies in their path. You can position yourself to put enemies in their path, and that's free damage. There is a remarkable degree to which the perceptive player can find opportunities to be clever in this way. The list goes on. Near objects hit much quicker than far objects. Everything is physics-based, so things in the way of your chosen object will slow it down. And objects themselves have their own properties. Big things hit harder than small things. Explosives hit the hardest, but they're also the rarest. And so it becomes useful to think about what you're launching, either to optimize for damage or to conserve the most useful thing for the most important enemy. It's a good thing in this context that Control has you moving around so much. Since the depth of launch is tied to the environment and to positioning, being in a constant rush means being constantly cycled through new positions and new parts of the environment with a fresh stock of objects to launch. The pace of interesting choices available to you is in this way kept at a high. Control's level design is strong, most arenas providing new kinds of things to launch, which is good for the spectacle, and in some way for the story, as you engage with the narrative context of the space during combat. Most arenas feature a mix of open spaces and tighter spaces, keeping things varied and allowing players to optimize navigation according to the range of their weapon. Most arenas feature circular paths and enough cover to allow for constant movement. Most arenas feature some kind of vertical element to hugely raise the number of relevant sightlines, and from that, create more interesting fights. It's good shooter level design, and yet the cost to the believability of the space is minimal, in part because Remedy put a lot of work into making it minimal, but also because believability comes easier to a building that makes its own rules. As we move into advanced depth, we start talking about overpenetration with Pierce, which can pierce enemies for conventional 2-for-1s, but also the environment, even through otherwise unbreakable structures. Jesse can seize enemies in Control, which has a double use as a stun. You can partially seize and use its disabling effect to close the gap. Jesse can also launch objects immediately from their starting position, or at any point on the path it takes as it floats towards you, which means you don't have to shoot straight on from Jesse's point of view, which means the fastest and most perceptive players can line up 2-for-1s from behind or the side. There's meat on the bone here. The question is it enough? The answer is, it's not that simple. Launch is the best source of the game's depth. Launch is also the best source of the game's shallowness. What does that mean? It means this. Launch can be deep. But when you're not using it deeply, either because it's not worthwhile or because there's no opportunity, then launch is pretty shallow. You press the button, Jesse will choose an object, you vaguely point at your target, Jesse will aim it for you. Launch lacks the most skill-intensive part of using a gun, and you are going to be using launch a hell of a lot. Why? Well, why don't I hit you with an example? This is what happens if you melee someone in Control. Bit of damage, bit of knockback. And this is what happens if you launch at someone in Control. That's more damage and more knockback. That's better than melee in melee range. Huh. Okay, maybe there's a guy far away. So you switch to Grip, the handgun, or Pierce, the sniper form for the service weapon. Now you're going to need to charge Pierce and you're going to need to aim it, with a very sensitive reticle and no aim assist by default. Grip doesn't need to charge, but it does lose accuracy fast. Launch, on the other hand, has an aimbot. It's a better sniper than the sniper at sniper range. A different scenario. You're in danger, there's a shield in Control, but you won't often use it. It's slow, it kills your visibility, and it means you can't attack, which means you can't heal. Launch, meanwhile, removes the threat, quickly, and gives you health. There are almost no situations where it isn't the smartest way to get out of danger. One more example. There's a guy. It's a normal encounter. You're going to be running around a lot in a normal encounter, and that makes the service weapon much harder to handle on account of its slippery aim. Especially in comparison to Launch, which has a fucking aimbot, and is also likely likely to be much stronger. There are not many situations where launch isn't the best gun in the game. If you can use launch, and you usually can, it's always best to. In most cases, that means less depth, because the correct decision is always the same, and less variety, as large parts of your moveset collect dust, either seen less often or not at all. Seize suffers the same fate, but through a less direct mechanism. Launch doesn't do anything that Seize can, but the speed of combat, particularly when launch is juiced, means that Seize is an incredibly inefficient means of fighting, doubly so without upgrades, and the problem there is that you're probably not going to upgrade Seize, because you're probably going to be spending your relatively precious slots and points on much more useful things for which upgrades cost the same amount. Remedy's skill tree balance is baffling. 3 points on melee, or 3 on launch. I don't know, man, maybe the one that's always in use and is also better, and also has higher upgrade percentages? Yeah, that one. Seize is cool. It's fun to build an army, and on occasion, a seized ally is a genuinely useful distraction. When I used it for these reasons. And it's not as though you'll never use the service weapon either. Sometimes you'll use it because it's worthwhile, oftentimes because launch ran out of energy. But balance impacts character. If you're mostly using the service weapon to pass the time until launch is recharged, then the service weapon takes on a feeling of weakness that undermines its mythical stature, and launch recharging won't take long, because it is limited by energy, but with time and investment into the progression system, those limits dramatically lessen. At best, aiming the service weapon when the service weapon is relevant, playing to the strength of its forms, intrinsic whims and advanced plays where possible, is as far as control substance goes. At worst, it's a game where you press the die button pointing vaguely in the enemy's direction. It's impossibly cool, but mechanically flat. So the hope would be that enemy and encounter design might get us out of this mess, and it does try, but it doesn't succeed. I want to start with the exception, mostly for the selfish purpose of soothing my guilt for a prior incident of being a dumbass. In the last video, I said 2 things: that shield was useless, and that there was no way to reliably avoid damage from Hiss Distorted, which I used to call creepers on account of the way they sneak up on you and explode. Guess what, guys? Shield is how you reliably avoid damage from Hiss Distorted. For fuck's sake. I mean, the shield's still useless outside of that, but I have come to appreciate the distorted encounters for the simple reason that they compel a different response from everything else. Mechanically, yes, but experientially too. This is the one enemy that doesn't fulfill Jesse's power fantasy. You were the hunted. The one enemy. That's the exception. The rule is a large amount of ideas that basically don't work. It's easy to imagine why Remedy might have made certain choices. There is a common perception. Third-person shooters are games where you shoot your gun. Getting players to move away from genre conventions can be extremely difficult, and so in Control, we see mechanics like enemy shields that specifically exist to encourage launch over the service weapon. Bullets scratch them, launch breaks through them. It works, it just doesn't understand its situation. In practice, enemy shields make you do something you were already going to do. They are mechanical dead weight. What about Hiss clusters? These are priests. They heal enemies in their presence. So you're either going to want to burst down the cluster itself before it can teleport away, or to burst down some other enemy before it has time to heal. In either case, you want to deal damage as quickly as possible. Launch is how you do that. There's popping zit things, which slowly advance towards you until they're close enough to explode. To maximize their distance, you want to kill them as quickly as possible, which means launch. And then there's fights with flying enemies, which are exclusively the least interesting fights in the game. Level design is completely removed from the equation, that's a basic feature of the premise, while viable options collapse to pierce and launch. But because you're fighting small, distant targets, the pressure is placed on aim, so launch wins the debate, because launch doesn't need to be aimed. Weak enemies, which are most flying enemies, die in one hit, so choosing what object to throw is made irrelevant. 2-for-1s are rarer because of the environment, while tougher enemies are only tougher because they can dodge, a mechanic that was, by Remedy's admission, specifically designed to discourage launch, that in reality does no such thing, because the best approach when someone dodges is to quickly spam out more launches so that they die before they can dodge again. Kill this guy first, kill this guy quickly. Demands for DPS simply reinforce launch's dominance. What happens as a result is that encounter design is flattened. It just doesn't matter that much what kind of enemies you're going up against, because your approach will mostly be the same. Later into the game, Jessie unlocks a new ability: Levitate. She can fly now. This has a number of real upsides, the foremost being that it's fucking dope, another being that with Levitate comes the Ground Pound, the new strongest attack in the game. The trade-off is that it consumes all your energy, which, if used poorly, places you in the middle of the heat with no defense. If you can kill a worthwhile target in one, it's genuinely useful. The challenge is in judging that. Unfortunately, Levitate has a downside. It erases level design. You're no longer beholden to the paths and tunnels of the arena. There's a guy up in the girders? You don't need to think about how to get there. Levitate means it's the same answer every time. That's not a big loss, but it is something. Here's a big loss. Levitate means that launch always has a usable sightline. There's a guy behind a large obstacle. Not any fucking more. One of the last things standing in launch's way were the literal things standing in its way. Stuff in the environment that a box may bounce off but a bullet may not, or that might encourage you to close the gap, making the shotgun more viable. Yeah, not anymore. With Levitate and later game upgrades that solidify launch's strength, control gets shallower with time, not deeper. So it's bad then. No, not really. To be honest, it even feels wrong to call Control's combat mediocre, because mediocre summons images of dust-laden cover shooters a fucking Far Cry 6, something everyone has already seen before. Mediocre feels like an unfitting description of a combat system I recommend everyone try, just to engage in its basic motions. Dr. Darling was right. Jesse is dynamite, which is to say, spectacular, but not for long. How do we solve this problem? It's a difficult question because the simple answer, nerf launch, causes an even bigger problem, that launch is the coolest thing about Control and I want to be using it. The second game will have to be careful. Buffs to Jesse's other abilities, level design that is still interesting with Levitate, launch not being able to one-shot from full health. But what Control really needs is to wake up. It needs enemy design to understand the game it's in. It needs to rethink the thinking that led to launch upgrades costing the same amount as melee upgrades. It needs a new philosophy. Until it gets one, the problem with the Control we have, boiled down to a single word, is, I think, time. It can't keep it up. It's like a pensioner's erection. And the campaign, the story, they also erode like the combat does as the game plows on. But there is one big difference. With combat, there is a lot of design that is functionally inert. Mechanics encouraging a strategy that's already dominant. Enemies whose presence means almost nothing. Abilities you'll rarely use, if ever. But with a campaign, the problem is not ineffectual things, it's the absence of things. There's simply not enough there. Take the puzzles. A decent example is Darling's HRA lab. You've got to figure out the correct sequence of symbols based off slightly vague clues you can find on a series of whiteboards, and that's your lot. Most of the other puzzles are about launching power boxes into power box receptacles, which is cool because it's novel to use launch to solve problems that aren't trying to shoot you. But then it stops being novel, which is a problem because it also doesn't evolve. There's finding the box, which is always easy, and there's getting the box to the right place, which is also always easy. It's like an endlessly recurring level 1, and yet, even when you've done this dance several times before, Control will still believe it necessary to explain this simple premise, which speaks to a fear of anyone getting stuck so powerful that Remedy believed tutorialization with objective prompts in a game as otherwise immersive as Control was justified. According to one designer, a similar fear led to the flattening of puzzles in the Ocean View Motel, which account for the remainder of the campaign's quantity. You are presented with a thing, that thing is in a certain state. A similar thing exists in all 3 rooms of the motel. Your job is to match their states. They're weird, and I like that. But the formula never changes. And the problem isn't that they're easy. Indeed, it's entirely possible that hard puzzles would have screwed with the pace. The problem is that in never changing, they just stop being interesting. A microcosm in that way for much of Control's campaign. The core loop of progressing through the house, aggressing against the hiss, and undressing the law. No other synonym rhymed, sorry. Goes unperturbed, with the spice you learn to expect from the side content remaining absent. There's no mushroom kingdom here. No boss fights, those are all optional. No surprise encounters, and not much in the way of wacky SCP stuff either. While the characterization and the game's central mysteries continue to not continue, you're increasingly directed by a plot that seems intent on erasing any sense of narrative momentum. Goal? Find Dylan. But first, make more HRA vests to protect the still living from being possessed by the hiss, despite the fact that everyone you know or care about already has one, so you're really doing this for people who are only implied to exist. Okay then, off to the HRA lab, but oh dear, wouldn't you know it, we're fresh out of HRA crafting materials. Guess that'll just be a not very quick trip down to a fucking quarry, where you can mine some more. In situations like these, it would be better to have no plot direction at all. It's better to feel like you're moving forward simply because it's the next place to go, than it is to feel like you're only here doing this because you've been contracted to do someone else's chores. Wouldn't it be better to learn that the Benikoff TV is wreaking havoc in the containment sector organically, and then put a stop to it, instead of walking into the front office and then being told to stop the TV? This part of the game does pick up a little. Dylan's in reach, no more obfuscations. But then, you find Dylan, who has painted Jesse's name on his cell in blood. Oh boy, it's silly, it's cliche, it doesn't fit Control in the slightest, it barely even makes sense. He rocks up back at base having been possessed by the hiss. He offers scattered insights into his cruel treatment at the hands of the Bureau, and little as to the nature of the hiss. Jessie is not unaffected by this, but for her, nothing really changes. That's the problem. Finding Dylan feels insignificant. We did it! Okay, now back to fixing doors. The stories pressed into the walls of the world. The lore, despite its struggles. The intrinsic pleasure of simply seeing the next thing. This is what keeps Control's heart beating. But it could have done with some help. By the end of Act 2, the flame has begun to sputter. Then Act 3 starts. It's very short, and it acts as a shot of adrenaline. Act 3 is where it stops being possible to generalize anything in Control. We need to get to dimensional research, but we can't get through the maze standing in the way. So Artie calls, with telepathy of course, and after walking through a series of rooms for 5 minutes, which sadly was not made engaging just because Remedy overlaid a PNG of some trees, our boy hooks us up with a zesty new bop. There is a saying amongst fans of Control: what's your favorite level, and why is it the ashtray maze? You're about to find out. This is the exception to the rules, the exception to the campaign's general lack of source, and on the face of it, the exception to Remedy's attempts not to speak for the things in their game. There's a rock song backing a set piece, and it's a pretty damn good one. Origami is made of the ashtray maze. The combat always lent itself to spectacle, and the song, alongside being amazing, was composed for Control, the lyrics written for Jessie, a dramatization of her journey, its progression walking with the level in lockstep. All of it heightened even further because there's nothing else like it in Control. It's a beautifully tuned explosion of theatrical energy, and yet it doesn't really break Control's rule. Remedy are not imposing an emotion onto their creation, the world is. The song and the means by which we hear it are diegetic. In the real world, take Control as composed by poets of the Fall, but in the fiction, they are the old gods of Asgard, the washed-up ancient rockers from Bright Falls, friends of Artie, and they are speaking to Jessie. Through this diegesis, Control's unique flavor of immersion is maintained, and the set-piece gains a narrative dimension. The music is a character thing. It's the cheering of strange beings unknown to Jessie. It's the reassurance that the world of magic is looking back at her, and for the first time, smiling. It is as though Jessie has passed a test, and in that there is a special catharsis.
That was awesome.
I love the ashtray maze. Beyond is dimensional research. This is where they use the slide projector that Jessie and Dylan found in Ordinary. The hiss are pouring in through Slidescape 39. We need to find it and turn it off. But instead, we find Polaris. No, we find Hedron, which is the source of Polaris. HRAs, Hedron resonance amplifiers, boosted signals, staving off the hiss. And the hiss know, and now they're here. And so we fight to save her, with a sense of urgency. It's a challenging fight. There is a sense of relief when we beat it, when we repel the hiss, which provides just the right setup for what happens next. We failed. Hedron falls apart. It's hard to feel anything for a sound inside a hexagon that doesn't talk and expresses no emotion, but there is emotion in Jessie's attachment to this being. It's her friend. It protected her. It made her feel special her whole life. It's the link to the world she wanted to believe in, the thing that showed her she wasn't crazy. With Jessie's grief and her fear, Courtney Hope proves herself once again, and then the hiss get in, push their fingers through the surface into the wet, and then Jessie is gone. Oh my god, did Control just make something interesting happen with the plot? And create emotion with the characters? Well, welcome back, Remedy. Let's hope this goes somewhere compelling, huh? We wake in Jessie's nightmare, which, as it turns out, is being a wagey for the hiss. A corporate slave to an uncaring bureaucracy. A life without magic. Of course this is what she fears. We collect coffee cups, deliver papers, bring Trench's mail. Yes sir, sorry sir, I'll do that right away sir. It's mechanically effective. Grey, as it should be. And it keeps happening. The same day, every day, but some things change. Artie knows. He sees through the dream. Trench is losing his grip. The hiss tighten theirs. There is repetition and descent. And through this, you're made to expect that if you simply keep repeating, then eventually you'll break through. And you will. But it is this expectation that makes it likely you'll miss the most important thing that happens here. Trench rambles to himself, delivering his mail as the final task of each day. The compulsion is to do it immediately, in the hope that you'll finally wake. Indeed, Jessie insists the moment you enter his office, I need to keep moving. Who then would have known that on his last day of consciousness, he'd keep rambling? for 5 minutes. A 5-minute monologue, the majority of what Trench says in Control, and the answers to so many things. Where we can find the slide projector, who let the hiss in and why, the details of his feud with Darling, and the nature of Artie. You shouldn't miss this. The most important things are in the first 30 seconds, so there's hope, but if you do, there will be holes that can never be filled, and Jesse will just seem to magically know where the slide projector is. The bigger problem is what happens next. Darling calls, using the hotline, which means he's either dead or somewhere far, far away. He tells us that Hedron was not a source, but a catalyst. He tells us to find his office. There is an entrance to the Ocean View Motel, and in the third room is Darling, dancing, singing. A cover written for Jessie. He's hyping her up. It's an earworm. And it's hilarious because it's so profoundly unexpected in the climax of the darkest part of the game. It works beautifully. Darling's use of the hotline, his appearance in a video that couldn't have been pre-recorded, his final log where he told us that he would fully expose himself to Hedron resonance and that would change him, combined to suggest that communicating in the form of a music video is a manifestation of distance. He is in some other dimension now, and this is his way of telling you to get back on your feet. At Jesse's low point, it feels emotionally right. Enjoy it. It won't last long. Another door is opened. Inside, we find Jessie, or Polaris. Jessie Polaris. She says, "Grow brighter." And from this, Jessie somehow concludes that Hedron is dead, but Polaris lives on inside her. Confused? Well, maybe you're supposed to be. Jessie's choice of words suggests that Hedron and Polaris are two separate beings, with separate lives, selves, and separate intentions, which was never before implied. It's never specified in this new context what Darling meant by catalyst, and Jessie wonders that perhaps Hedron was trying to teach her how to trigger Jessie Polaris, which doesn't really line up with anything we've just experienced. Jessie Polaris was triggered by Jessie resisting the Hiss's possession, with the unique benefits of Darling's help. But that could have happened at any time. Most Control fans reached the conclusion that Hedron was a source/catalyst for Polaris, and when it died, Jessie became the new source/catalyst for Polaris. But Jessie, she wonders if she'll ever understand. She wonders if that's okay. Indeed, the concepts and language here seem intentionally confusing, perhaps to make an artistic point, that some things can't be understood, and nor do they have to be. But that, if true, is a point clumsily made, because it's not the nature of Polaris that confuses, it's the intentionally confusing ways that Polaris is described. And there is a price of all this strangeness. A death is reversed and Jessie recovers from her darkest hour, for a reason that feels like it was pulled from thin air, and that has nothing to do with her character. It's really very unsatisfying. But now the bitch is back, and we're back in the bitchin' business. Burning with the resonance of Hedron, Jessie parts the seething tides of Hiss in the nostalgia department. With a newfound confidence, she condemns Trench's obsessive need for control and marches forward. The board is in danger. The Hiss have wormed their way into the astral plane. Oh my god, there are stakes all of a sudden. Well, what impeccable timing, that the clock would start ticking the moment we needed it to. It is very contrived. The board tosses you an emergency can of Jessie juice for the apocalyptic occasion, and you become unstoppable. Unfortunately for Remedy, scribbling level 30 above the enemy's heads and cranking launch damage even higher than it already was, doesn't actually make the following 10 standard combat encounters feel especially climactic. At the end, you will find no boss fight. You cleanse Dylan, he falls into a coma, a limbo that neither leads to a sense of victory or defeat. The projector is turned off, but some Hiss remain, because the post-game content needs it to, and Jessie accepts her directorship over the Bureau of Control. And then the game ends. It's cold, emotionless. It's not even conceptually interesting, which was kind of Control's whole thing. Jessie's decision to direct the Bureau willingly doesn't not make sense, but it also doesn't feel earned. For the last few hours, Control has insisted upon the notion of taking control. It was sung to Jessie, it was baked into her nightmare, both the title of the mission and represented as a change in status from an obedient office peon to director of the Bureau. The notion doesn't come out of nowhere. Where the setup fails is the lack of deep roots in character. Why does Jessie Faden take control? In what way did the events of the game teach Jessie that what she needed as a person was control? A lack of control is not a defining feature of her character. She does claim that this is her mess to clean up, perhaps implying that she feels responsible for what happened, because she was the one who discovered the slide projector when she was a child. But no sense of guilt is dramatized in this story. It's not that Jessie's choice is illogical. It makes sense that she would want to control the organization responsible for her brother and the world that she loves, but that's logic. The problem is that in being detached from any dramatically relevant aspect of character, it does not lead to an emotionally satisfying end. it also doesn't lead to a thematically satisfying end. What's the message of Control? That taking control is good? But why? Where's the because section? And hang on a minute, isn't Trench explicitly condemned for his obsessive need for control? Those are Jessie's exact words spoken about 5 minutes ago, while Jessie herself is celebrated for taking more and more control and then total control of the Bureau of Control. So is control the problem or the solution? Remedy aren't confused, they know the difference between Jessie and Trench. Trench led from a stance of fear, his paranoia locked Dylan in a cage. Trench bad, while Jessie's position is one of acceptance, and that's good. But that's not what the ending says. It's not about the difference between Jessie and Trench. It's about Jessie realizing her contrived destiny as Girl Boss Prime. It's an ending shaped like an ending, but that leaves you without thought or feeling. You want to know what I think Control is really about? I think that Control is about our relationship to the subconscious mind, the source of what might as well be magic. Sam Lake, face of Max Payne, heart of Remedy's inexhaustible creativity, likes Carl Jung, an old Swiss psychologist who thought a lot about the goings-on in the deepest parts of our head. Control likes Carl Jung. Indeed, so does the entire Remedy-connected universe. It uses his terms, like threshold, archetype, and shadow. Its lore tells us his theories are true, that humanity's collective unconscious projects a measurable psychic force.
We can change the likelihood of something being a receptacle for these forces just by thinking about it.
That the archetypes of our mind are tangible, and sometimes its stories are founded on Carl Jung's lessons. In Alan Wake 2, we integrate the archetypal shadow. To integrate is to make an aspect of the unconscious conscious, to bring it out of the dark and into the light, to accept it and make it a part of ourselves. If we do, our consciousness will grow. If we don't, it will rule our lives and we will call it fate. You might say, Jung believed in control. That's what Jessie is. An embodiment of integration, a natural avatar of accepting the unknown, learning from it, and making it a part of her being. Though in more physical and literal terms, this is why Jessie chooses to direct the Bureau, despite what they've done to her world, to her brother, to her. She takes control because control is good. Polaris and the Hiss are alien minds on the surface only, in the low terms of law. But what they really are manifestations of the unconscious mind.
They strike me as instinctual. Less conscious, more like a collective impulse.
Vibes and resonances, literally and symbolically, who can only be described as a feeling, who can express only in unconscious terms. Polaris is the imaginary friend, silent to all but Jessie, and gains a spoken voice when it is integrated into her. And the Hiss, an earworm, whose relentless incantation is written in the form of a Dadaist poem, a 20th century surrealist form of poetry that is designed specifically to never make sense in conscious terms, to resemble the flowing of a dream.
I'd open my eyes with those words still on my lips. See, in the dream they had made perfect sense, but awake they're like a foreign language, already forgotten.
Control is about a war between concrete and liquid, science and magic. One level deeper is what those things represent, the solidity of consciousness against the lapping waves of thought and feeling in our deeper minds. And Jessie fights for both. Her loyalty is split between magic and the people of the Bureau. Jessie is a hero of two worlds, who will bring unity and peace through control. I think what this game really means to tell you is that this war is real, and that there is a way to end it. If it isn't about that, fuck. If it is, well, sweet. But it doesn't offer an ironclad defense. Control's world captivated me like nothing ever has. I haven't been thinking about it for all this time because I wanted to find out for the sake of an analysis I might never have made whether or not there was anything really there. I've been thinking about Control because it made me want to. As far as I'm concerned, it can claim the benefits of analysis. And yet, the truth remains that stories succeed when they communicate an emotion. Control's story doesn't. It's fascinating, and it has a third act peppered with flashes of brilliance, but it mostly isn't about anything, besides finding a way to open the next door at the behest of a cardboard cutout. Jessie's character arc might make perfect sense through a certain thematic lens, but if you view her as a human being, it remains hollow and unimpactful. The ending has you throw boxes at zombies to save a triangle. Why? Probably because Control suffered from major budgetary constraints, and it went into production before the screenplay was finished. The reality of creating things is the greatest influence on any created thing. Control is weird, in case you hadn't noticed. So it benefits from a protective shell of plausible deniability that makes people who feel left behind think, I just didn't get it. Well, I don't think you did, but I don't think that's your fault either. One of Control's stories fail. to succeed. Neither involved character, yet while one kept me fascinated, the other made me feel something. Control is lucky, because the strength of all the other kinds of stories it tells means the hole its central narrative leaves in the game is small enough not to be a lethal wound. You will not leave the oldest house wanting for something meaningful. You'll just have to face up to a nasty scar, a permanent limp, one among many. Control is brilliant, and it is haunted by emptiness, by lacking and absence, riddled with holes like this. Control is a bitch, because it's hard to square the two truths that it is, in many ways, one of my favorite games, and that sometimes it honestly isn't that exciting. Luckily for me, now's not really the time for conclusions, because this isn't the end, not anymore. Jessie Faden rises from her desk with a sweet new hairpiece, willing director of the Bureau of Control. And now, things have changed. In 2019, there was little left to do. You could wrap up side missions, maybe collect some outfits such as Minimalist Sith Lord, cool I guess, mid, Director of McDonald's, and some more assorted mid. Point being, it was a dry selection. But it's been 5 years since then. We've had a free content update and 2 new chapters that amount to an Act 4, The Adventures of Director Faden. I'm a big fan of the way Remedy don't make the DLC look or feel like DLC, instead presenting themselves like anything else would, something stumbled onto, an alert that suddenly appears. When the game ends, it is time to do the DLC, but it feels like a natural continuation of Control. So, what first? That depends. If your plan is to head into Alan Wake 2 after Control, do Foundation first and Alan Wake last. Otherwise, Alan comes first, because it functions more like a Villain of the Week episode than a turning point, the next stage of Jessie's story. That way functioning well as a break between the ending of the main game and the true ending of Control in Foundation. Act 4 then takes on a satisfying and well-paced arc. So what's John Click whining about this time? Something dark's lurking in the new investigation sector. Emil Hartman, the therapist from Bright Falls, has been spit-roasted by the corrupting force of the dark presence in the Hiss. Emerging here is a 20-foot gremlin bastard haunting the halls of investigations. There's a soft cat-and-mouse dynamic as you engage in Control's usual gameplay loop. Nothing so impressive or AI-driven as Alien Isolation, but at scripted moments that are not always predictable, Hartman will find you, and when he does, you're the mouse. Unsurprisingly, the theme of the Alan Wake DLC is horror, and it's pretty well done. The investigation sector is characterized by an eerie sense of abandonment.
Anyone here?
Cluttered debris, things left in a hurry, others marked out of order. The rest of the Bureau was taken by the Hiss before anyone could react, but this disaster took time, and so a different tale is told. Of fear. The ceilings are low, the walls are cramped, light barely has room to breathe, darkness presses closer. Remedy nail the atmosphere. And the tutorialization. Light is the core mechanic down here. Jessie doesn't have a flashlight, but she does have a lamp, and the Force. Launch adds an element of feedback and physicality that makes Controls among the most intrinsically satisfying flashlights I've used in a game yet. Remedy have done that twice, but it's a minor victory. You'll only be using the lamp to cook some darkness goop, never to fight anyone or to light the way. No, for that we return to the embrace of an old friend. Oh, hey power boxes, how have you been? Not this fucking guy again. Good news is, Remedy have seen the light in a second sense. Finally, we've moved past level 1. You'll have to think for a moment to solve Wake's puzzles. Maybe one thing needs to happen before another thing can be done. They're better. They're fine. They're best when they're being used to make a mechanical challenge out of the horror. Hartman pounces and you're trapped in an elevator and then surrounded by swamp-like darkness. You can see the glow of a power box in the mist. You can spend only moments in the swamp before Hartman catches you. Figure it out, Jessie. The game is one of short bursts forward, hoping you have enough time to make it to the next patch of light, to the next box, to turn on the next light. It's a remarkably effective concept. It's kinda scary, and Remedy lean on it a lot, even for some unique combat challenges, where the darkness creates a limited space of safety and a limited time to work outside it. But it's used too much. Remedy, as ever, do too little to change the routine. Soon, the routine becomes predictable. You become confidently aware of exactly how much time you have to safely move in the dark. And as that truth matures, the horror loses much of its effect. Oh shit, Hartman slowly becomes, oh, hey Hartman. As with the base game, time weakens Alan Wake. There are no other enemies, just the Hiss, Hartman, and gallons of black goo. It's solid, not much more. So, what's it like to be director? Complicated. When Jessie came here, she was everything the Bureau was not. So trashing their offices and spraying dirt across their freshly cleaned floors was a coherent act. Now, Jessie is the willing director. This is her house, and these are her people. But laying it to ruin is still the basic means of interaction with Control. It's how you pass the time, it's an inevitability of combat. The result is an unaddressed dissonance. Control was designed for a woman who opposed her environment, not its leader, and to a noticeable degree, you can feel it. Control becomes a less cohesive experience in its postgame. It's a problem, a lurking offness that future entries are going to have to deal with. On the flip side, the DLCs introduce a new mechanic to help legitimize the role of director through gameplay. Certain encounters allow you to summon allied rangers. In mechanical terms, that's no different from having a seized ally. Their primary value is distraction, but in narrative terms, having a human friend is very different from mind-controlling a corpse. You're the reason they're here. If they die, it's because of you, and if you were good enough, you could have saved them. Remember the Marines in Halo? It can introduce a unique tension to these encounters. It works nicely. It's in these moments that you feel like director the most. Another of Alan Wake's mechanical contributions is a new way to blow up your own crib, Surge, a grenade launcher for the service weapon, which differentiates itself from Charge, the rocket launcher, by empowering the player to decide when the bomb goes off, triggered detonation, and the bombs stick, even to launchable objects. Oh my god, is that a whole new dimension of combat to master? No. Upon further testing, it turns out the damage of a launched object is identical with or without the explosion, a silent nerf that defies logic and, inevitably, expectation. Thanks, Remedy, you got my balls looking like they were cooked by Walter White. But in spite of that crushing disappointment, Surge is fun. I like blowing things up. Its real problem is its competition, and that's the real conversation. There's a sniper, a shotgun, a machine gun, and a pistol in Control. Along with Surge and Charge, that makes 6 to choose from, but you can only equip 2 at a time. Now, broadly speaking, there are 2 types of encounters in Control. Ones with flying enemies, which means longer ranges, and ones without flying enemies, which tend to be much tighter. To cover all your bases then, you want something accurate, like grip or pierce, paired with something intimate, like shatter or spin. You're not gonna die if you rock a different combo, but you are putting yourself at an obvious disadvantage. Surge and Charge are actively harmful at close range, because splash damage believes in gender equality, and they are also terrible at long range, because they fire slow, inaccurate projectiles. So you're left with a narrow set of circumstances where they make sense, like the not many times enemies decide to form a group, or embarrassing a distorted by sticking a bomb to its little invisibility cloak, which is wonderful in the 3 distorted encounters left in Control. The problem is, a 2-weapon limit leaves no room for these weapons unless you're willing to accept the debuff they represent. Some people are, but incentives are like gravity. It's a shame in a game like Control that wants for variation. And strange, because the limitation doesn't seem to have much of a point. In most games with 2-weapon limits, there's a major balancing implication. More guns means you can shoot more because more of the ammo you're carrying can be used, and with more guns, you can avoid reloading by weapon switching more often. The more guns, the stronger. But here's the thing, Control doesn't work that way, because the service weapon has a universal cooldown. Every form shares the same magazine. If I use Shatter, that spends the mag for grip. What that means is, having another slot wouldn't make Jessie significantly stronger. I couldn't avoid any limitations or shoot any more often, but maybe I'd use Charge sometimes if I had it on me. In fact, having just one more slot, 3 instead of 2, would make space for a fun option whilst having both ranges covered. So why 2? What's the benefit? I'd grit my teeth and accept the realities of developing for a controller if the D-pad was occupied, but it isn't. It's doing nothing. And Remedy's stated defense, that the limitation invites the player to carefully prepare for the next encounter, would only make sense if you had any way to know ahead of time what kind of enemies would be in future encounters, which you don't. Or, more pressingly, if preparation would actually be useful in Control, which it wouldn't. If I equip 2 close-range weapons for a close-range encounter, they share a magazine, so I'm shooting at exactly the same rate as I was before. The 2-weapon limit doesn't do anything for Control besides limit it. It limits variation in a game wanting for variation. That's a shame. So let's change the subject. Alan Wake, Control, Quantum Break, even Max Payne, all sharing the same world as part of gaming's foremost connected universe. We've seen multiple entries sharing a setting in the same franchise, but here, it is multiple franchises that share a setting. With Remedy, we change protagonist, genre, tone, and fantasy among the most foundational elements of art, providing hugely different perspectives on the same things, characters, and ideas. Control is where that idea solidified, the oldest house like a nexus from which everything else branches. And the Alan Wake DLC is the first time that connection has gone beyond reference, beyond a passing glimpse to asking for a date. Like when Steve Rogers first woke in Stark's time. Question is, does that benefit the games? Simply, Yes, because each game in it is at its core about mystery, and each game's mysteries are good, and now they are connected. On the horizon of Control, I now see so much more. More patterns, more possibilities, a bigger picture. I care about Control, so I started caring about Alan Wake. I can see Alan Wake as a new dimension of Control, and that excites me. Alan Wake is the future of Control, and that excites me more. And so I explore the investigation sector with a special fascination. Lore that talks of Alice and the Bureau's perspective on Bright Falls and the Dark Place. The DLC is given fuel by its connection, and so is Alan Wake 2. So is the universe. As Saga, I meet Tim Breaker, and I'm instantly intrigued because that's Quantum Bloke. Tim Breaker, Time Breaker, you guys get it. When he talks of a red-haired woman, I'm perked up like a cat who heard the rustling of the biscuit bag across the house, because I happen to know a red-haired woman. Two, in fact, Jane Control and Quantum Becky. But which Courtney Hope might it be? I'm waiting to hear about how Alan's writing might have changed the hiss, to see another snippet of Darling as the television sets change signal. I explore the FBC's abandoned stations with particular excitement as Saga, and I view the triangular symbology of the Cult of the Tree with unique suspicion. Alan Wake 2 rewarded me for knowing Control. This, more than anything, established my trust in the Remedy-connected universe. Not that it was always planned out, or that everything in it will become relevant, or that Remedy will somehow overcome the IP laws that keep Quantum Break locked in the Microsoft threshold, but the franchise and genre can and will meaningfully interweave. The RCU works forwards, but it works backwards too, back in time as long ago as Max Payne 1, whose famous phone call now sounds strangely like something written by Wake and spoken by the Hiss. There's Quantum Break, where Mr. Hatch and Mr. Door share a striking resemblance. And there's Control, with its realm of doors, where the symbols have taken on a new meaning. Entire conversations are given context, and so many other things too, cast in a new light as the borders of Jesse's world grow and the poster peels further back. The Remedy-connected universe has proven itself, because Control made Alan Wake 2 better, and Alan Wake 2 made Control better, and Remedy have earned my trust that it will all happen again, soon. And no part of Control benefits more than here, in Alan Wake. The darker, spookier tone of investigations welcomes the slower pace demanded by large periods of reading things and scouring the environments for clues. Getting bogged down is less of a problem for the pace here. It fits. So the exploration is good. The lore is good, the central mysteries are fascinating, which is good because the DLC doesn't bother with any other kind of story. Well, apart from one PA call from Langston, who carefully considers the chances of Jesse liking his cat, for like 10 minutes. Langston was the officer in charge of the Panopticon, most interesting of the Bureau NPCs in the base game, but that's not saying much. Until now, I suppose. The content of his introspection covers everything from his cat to his philosophy. Perhaps it's unsurprising to say that that does make him a more interesting character. I like that you get to decide whether to or for how long to entertain him. His endless rambling reveals an innocent kind of vulnerability, a loneliness that characterizes a player's decision to stay as a favor to Langston, which I think adds a unique layer of attachment, and is also the kind of thing a good director might do. Well, I guess I like Langston now. I'm not quite sure what Remedy were thinking. Langston isn't important. He doesn't actually do anything in this DLC or in the base game besides talk. But fuck it. Why not? Control is a better game for him being a better character. I'll take the win. Moving on to the level design. During the second half of the DLC, Remedy start getting way too comfortable with giant empty concrete rooms. One giant empty concrete room is fine, but 6? That's too many giant empty concrete rooms. It starts to get a bit dull, creeps too close to living up to the memes about Control's art style. Alan Wake is brought down by its second half, as repetition sets in of mechanics and environment. A lacking that it seems Control has not yet found a way to escape. Stoop to a 6, started at a 9, take the mean average, that's just fine. Though there is another problem, one I need to discuss separately. Control has a loot system, yeah. Now, I've prepared a thought experiment for you. If you had to choose between a large, non-conditional buff to something you're always using, or a minor conditional buff to something you're rarely using, what would it be? The most obvious problem with Control's loot, besides the fact that it's all boring stat buffs, is that Remedy seem to think that's a much harder choice than it really is. You've got limited mod slots, 3 for Jessie, 3 for each of her 2 guns, and the balance is certifiably insane. Lots more health, lots more energy, lots more damage. I'll have those ones, please. Every other personal mod has to compete with that holy trinity, and they inevitably fail, because everything else is situational. How often am I using shield or seize? 50% faster seize is good, but it's not as good as making my health bar 30% longer, and even if it was 100% longer or 200, it still wouldn't be as good. It's no better for the guns, improved zoom for pierce, or 30% more damage when I'm aiming. It's a sniper, man. When aren't I aiming? Mod stack. You can equip multiple versions of the same one. So the best combination is never going to be anything besides stacking the best damage mods you have. Aim damage, headshot damage, or damage. The most interesting building control is using energy renewal on headshots with spin, because being a machine gun, spin can do a lot of headshots. The result is an energy tractor beam, energy being the thing you need to launch. So, the most interesting build for the service weapon is the one that makes it so there's no reason to use the service weapon. In the early game, when Jessie has one slot for herself and each of her guns, you equip the good mod, and then you spend the next few hours unexcitedly opening chests, hoping for the slim possibility that you'll get a slightly better version of that good mod. With time, things slightly improve. Maybe it's better to sacrifice the health mod for a second energy mod, but we are still looking at a world record contender for gaming's most unnecessary loot system. I haven't even mentioned the inventory space, which is low enough to demand multiple trips for slow deletions, one by cocking one over the course of the game, or that rarity levels can be far too close to each other, leading to moments where you find a prime version of the good mod, only to find it's a 1% improvement. Control actually did the meme. This sounds catastrophic, and it is for the loot system, just not for the game. It doesn't bog things down, it just means the chests the game didn't need aren't exciting, and that the process of upgrading the service weapon is a bit sterile. But why am I talking about this now? For 3 reasons. One is the fact that I didn't have a segue earlier. The second is that the DLC makes it much worse. You might be wondering, how's that possible? Answer: they doubled down. DLC mods are more conditional, happier to provide minor buffs for abilities you never use. They've given up on trying to compete with the good mods, and for the player even remotely interested in making good choices, that's going to make pretty much every chest in any DLC area a guaranteed dud. Gains 16% ammo from taking melee damage, 20% cheaper evades when you've recently hit someone with a shield bash. Health recovery on launch is pretty good, but that's about it. Their one upside is that through their absurdity, they create a small potential for challenge runs. If for some reason you want a good evade build instead of a good build, well, actually, it'd still be smarter to equip the energy buffs, but okay, if for the sake of a bump in variety you want a challenging evade build, where you're incentivized to take explosion damage or something, now you can do that. Is anyone going to do that? Maths says yes, and for whoever that person is, I'm happy. Unfortunately, we haven't even gotten to the third reason yet, that some of the post-game content seems way the hell too sure of the loot's ability to motivate me. Expeditions, the free content update. Put a penny in the magic jukebox and off you fuck to the Formation, an unmapped region of the Black Rock Quarry where the hiss will be fought and loot will be taken. If you beat all 4 basic objectives at a significantly raised difficulty within 25 minutes, where death wipes progress on whatever objective you died on, and even if you make it, you're still not fucking done, because now it's time for a boss fight. It's a boss fight in name and health bar only, just a usual distorted, but the point is, expeditions are a serious challenge. And that's a problem, because the purpose remedy of assigned to them is the loot, the golden chest at the end, in which you will find some of the worst mods in the game. Expeditions have a number of exclusive mods, which are some of the worst mods in the game. They also have the good mods, and so what you're trudging through Control's hardest content for are slightly better percentages on mods you will already have by the time Expeditions unlock. Who's excited by that? Not no one, but not many. Loot can't motivate shit in Control, but that doesn't mean Expeditions can't work outside of their given purpose. I think they look great. I appreciate having a serious challenge in Control, but I don't think they work as the kind of repeatable post-game combat arena you'd boot up for a quick session every now and then, or even as a tiered activity that expects more than one increasingly difficult run to test yourself against, mainly because Expeditions don't hold up to repetition. Why? The time limit. 25 minutes is tight, and that is going to have a restricting effect on gameplay. You need to be efficient, and you can't afford to die, which doubles the pressure to play smart and to do nothing but. The gravity of the balance that says launch, launch, launch is always best, that says headshot damage mods are always best, that says charge is a bad choice, strengthens to crush most any whimsical impulse. You can't be throwing in melees for the fuck of it, certainly not on bad guys who can one-shot you with health bars longer than the River Nile. It's a pressure to do the same thing. That doesn't go well with repetition. It gets worse. Objectives that don't demand all enemies dead gives you a massive incentive to rush the objective and to leave as quickly as possible, to skip the enemies, to do that every subsequent run only making slight improvements to your route. Expedition, not plural. Any more than once, the fun starts to fade. You'll find that the fun is fadin'. Let's fucking go. I knew I could get that in there. Control is a better game for having them, just not by much.
Guess the song ended. Good timing.
The best endgame activity in Control is Shoom.
Shoom. Shim? Shoom. Yom. Whatever.
An altered arcade machine that allows Jesse to replay boss fights and the Ashtray Maze, and take part in 2 new combat challenges. New is being generous. It's just logistics from the containment sector and waves of normal enemies, but there's no time limit, and it's a genuine challenge. Given the dependence of Control's combat on its environment, being stuck in the same room limits Shoom's success as a repeatable arena mode. But it is a solid arena mode, and it's also the Ashtray Maze on speed dial. Control is a better game for having this too. Which leaves us with Foundation. If Alan Wake was the next step for the Remedy universe and Control by connection, Foundation is the next step for Control and the Remedyverse by connection. Here, Jesse and the Bureau move forward by going downward to the roots of the oldest house. Marshall is missing. The board inform you of an urgent crisis /UTO in the Foundation, making this Jesse's first official task as director. The Foundation is not what you'd expect. It's white caves and red sand. It's primal, like you've gone back in time. It's completely unlike the oldest house, and that's part of the reason it works so well so late into the game. And yet, it is completely like Control, a contrast of simple, bold materials and colors. It's alien, and yet fitting. It's so fucking beautiful, but I would not want to be here alone. Soon, we find the id, the beings we so thoughtlessly used for practice in the astral plane, gather in these dark caves. Black, blank, faceless, but not devoid. They're creepy and innocent. They're a mystery, a human redacted bar. Is that why they're called the id? The unknowable unconscious, the foundation of the human psyche. Fits into my game theory. Documents and audio logs track the Bureau's first expedition into the oldest house, the first head of research, the first director to be appointed the service weapon, to meet the board. The place felt so strange. People went mad. Not everyone trusted the id. Not everyone trusted the board. In the quiet caverns now, we imagine what it must have been like for that first team. To see cave paintings made by things that might be human, watched by the faceless, to be lost in a shifting maze in the shadow of black monuments, to be commanded by an unknown astral being that could bestow the tools and powers of a god that no one dared to question, at least not openly, because the id didn't seem to like that. The lore in Foundation is uniquely focused by Control standards. It tells one central narrative of fear and fascination, whose echoes become an atmosphere in the present. You start to feel the strange energies they describe. Ask the questions they did of the blank and faceless. Like a found footage story, art and lore working in close cooperation, what we hear of the past haunting what we see in the present, and it works like magic. Sometimes, a place in a good game stays with you. I am followed by the Foundation. The first hour or two of this DLC is an elevation of what Control did best. So, for me, this was the best part of Control. But there's more down in these caves than the ethereal. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a new fucking enemy type. I swear I met this guy behind a McDonald's once. The Hiss Sharpened have an axe. And anger issues. That are a thing for Jesse. They really want to close the distance, but unlike the Charged, they're going to. They're fast, they have an evade. They hit hard, and it's hard to hit them back. And that puts you on the back foot. The Sharpened effectively encourage evade and a defensive use of levitate, but they don't allow that to be an easy counter. When you fly, they throw axes, which gives you 2 options: catch the axes with launch or evade. Both cost energy. Keeping it up costs energy faster than you can recover energy. Flight then is a fleeting refuge, leaving us with a unique trade-off between the ground, which is dangerous, and the air, which is costly. The simple benefit of encouraging the use of any ability that costs energy besides launch is that the higher energy demands encourages using launch with wiser intent, at a more considered pace. What all this amounts to is one of the most intrinsically challenging enemies in Control, and a basic victory. When a Sharpened is in an encounter, the encounter is different. The Sharpened is successful enemy design in a game with mostly flaccid enemy design, and perhaps that is the reason they aren't always seen that way. A lot of people get their asses kicked and call it frustrating. Not because dodging attacks is that difficult a concept to grasp, but because friction is the inevitable result of being different in a game that has spent the last 15 hours training you to think of most every encounter as the same. A lot of people forget that the dodge button even exists in Control. It's not normal to need to adapt. and the price of breaking that norm is that some people are slow to learn. But I'll concede that perhaps the sharpened would have gone down smoother with the tooltip, a reminder that Jesse's dodge is a thing. Foundation's flagship mechanics, though, come courtesy of the board. There are crystal beds in the caves, and we are given a choice. Would you like to destroy crystals to access new areas, or would you like to extend crystals, which can form paths to access new areas, and activate traps in combat? Well, the second one can do more, so I picked the second one. There's a limited degree to which you can manipulate where an enemy is in control. There's no force push, you can't launch living enemies, so the most you can do to intentionally set up a trap is backing away from those who chase you. Sometimes that can happen, but mostly opportunities arise by chance, and the challenge then is simply being quick enough to hit the button. It's an expansion, just not a very big one. Same thing goes for the choice. Nice to have, lays a small sense of ownership over a playthrough, but that's about it. Consequences don't last, because before long, you will get the second ability. You just won't have permission. Seeds of suspicion planted by the law grow into a central narrative conflict. A question: should we trust the board? When the opportunity comes to access power 2, the board says no and the board says, yo, is this bitch for real? They offer no explanation. They command bluntly. There's evidence they've been hiding things from you. Jessie doesn't like that. So, she decides to piss and shit all over the place, figuratively speaking. The former shows up, result of a long-lasting feud with the board. The board tells you not to trust the former tells you not to trust the board. But the board's being stingy with the powers and the former's offering the second one free of charge, so hey, here's to new friends. I'm being serious. Control expects you to believe that Jessie would trust the muffled words of a bug-eyed Fruit Loop who was actively trying to kill us the last 3 times we met, and who seemed intent on undermining the containment of altered items at the FBC. And she does all this based entirely on the promise of a new toy.
I don't like you deciding what I can't have.
I mean, I'd do that, and I respect Jessie's naturally trusting nature, but you're director of the FBC? And presumably not suicidal. The board's untrustworthy. That doesn't mean immediately start trusting everyone the board doesn't like. I suppose Jessie never did learn not to take free candy from the strange-looking man in a white van, but fuck me. It makes her look petulant and dumb.
But it is giving me something you won't.
Safe money is on that not being Remedy's intent. I'd call it a misfire, a failed attempt at being part of Jessie's overconfident characterization in Foundation.
Not sure she's ready.
I'm here, aren't I? I saved the Bureau once, and I'll do it again.
She's director. She's a girl boss now. We don't need no stupid space triangle ordering her about, let alone Bug-Eyed Joe, so she mutters clapbacks and conducts herself with authority.
I'm getting pretty tired of being jerked around the astral plane. If you're listening, I want some answers.
That's a good thing. Serves to solidify Jessie's decision to take control of her life and the Bureau. Serves to portray a struggle to settle into such an intimidating role. It's funny too, and pretty much the only character thing that happens in Foundation. Hey, I'll take what I can get. But anyway, now we have the second ability. You can break obstacles, you can access a few chests, no different from being able to make crystals for the same purpose. They're basically gassed up keycards, or at least that's what they should be. I want to talk about when they're not. Sometimes, Foundation expects these abilities to mechanically uphold large sections of content. The question is, how? How'd you make shooting a thing to make it break, or spawning a preset crystal in a preset location an interesting mechanic for puzzles? Foundation doesn't know. A platform is in the wrong place. Shoot the crystals, trapping it. Later, there will be multiple crystals and they will grow back if you don't shoot them all quickly enough. But that doesn't mean find an intelligent position, or the optimal order so that you are able to shoot them all quickly enough, the way it worked in God of War. It just means don't take a coffee break halfway through the mag dump. It's interesting once, not upwards of 10 times, not even when they change the context to a box instead of a platform. What further characterizes these regions are large periods of traversal, big distances that demand long levitations, sometimes amidst nothing. Astral emptiness. It's a blank space baby, and I'm tired of this game. Control's always struggled with uninteresting puzzles, but building entire regions from them? It is difficult to perceive these parts of Foundation as anything but Remedy playing for time. Indeed, Foundation is a contrast of extremes. It is Control at its very best, and at its very worst. Another contrast. The low quality of its powers with the brilliance of its altered items. Same deal as ever, optional content about containing an SCP, ones in the caves, dark caves, that we must find our way through with the light of a television show. The id were watching that television show, and they do not appreciate the interruption. So it's a balance. Light the way, calm the id. The darkness allows for sudden, pounce-like introduction of new id, new angles to consider and cover, leading to an increasingly frantic escape, and horror. It's effective, somehow more so than the actual flashlight sections in the Alan Wake DLC, and it's placed well. Making Jessie vulnerable at the height of her strength helps the moment land. The second altered item is up, far above. A film camera that bends the world to its creative purpose, which, as it turns out, is a Carpenter brought music video. Cheesy 80s action, another well-placed contrast with the serious tone of Foundation and the musiclessness of Control. This is the game's second ashtray maze, and the sequel's never quite as good. Here, because it goes on for 8 whole minutes when it's made its point several times over by minute 6. But on the other hand, it is cool as fuck, the track is cool as fuck, and it put a mile-wide smile on my face. It's part of one of the better sections of Foundation, our return to the upper floors. Control's base game never designed combat spaces to strongly emphasize movement and sightlines. Here we have an arena that does, with a rising stack of cubicles, where being or seeing inside of one partially or fully occludes your view of the others. It's one of Control's more memorable fights for that reason, but it stands out most strongly against the rest of Foundation, its red sand and white space. We are protected in these environments from the dissonance of Jessie's directorship with her destructive power. Foundation is precisely when this needed not to be a problem, and the Foundation means it isn't. But there's another problem. Remedy can't catch a break. That these environments are uniquely frail to the pressure of repetition. There's the astral plane, where generalized destructibility is at a minimum, or those pretty red caves, where it's only a bit more than a minimum. In both cases, the number of things that can be launched is very low, removing some depth, but mostly removing spectacle. You're always throwing the same kind of rock, watching the same kind of crumble. Now, novelty counters that for the first hour, less so by the fourth. Reality is, Remedy have created a combat system where world and character are inseparable in artistic and mechanical terms, where the intimacy of world and character create the game's best qualities. Break that connection, you lose more than a little. Foundation's deepest problem is that it lacks the mechanical substance to sustain its length, so it needed more substance, or it needed to be shorter. Foundation is an exaggeration of Control. It is a 10 out of 10 and a 5, and it ends at about a 6. Marshall's a hiss. Oh no, I'm sorry, but Marshall is a cardboard cutout. Foundation makes her central, but it doesn't bother with the kind of humanization afforded to Langston, so there's no connection here. We don't share Jessie's rage. Looks good though. Marshall is a hiss sharpened with a massive health bar, so she's a decent challenge. At the very least, it feels good to beat her. Foundation ends on a note of discord between Jessie and the board. A setup, no doubt, for things to come.
Well, fuck you too. Oh, I'll be sure to.
Jessie declares her intent to be ready for the next crisis, to lead the Bureau toward its own purpose, not that of the board. As our perspective on their black form inverts, the pyramid pointing down, a symbol of conflict, becomes a pyramid pointing up, an image of stability, a satisfying end. This is what Foundation gives to Control, a satisfying end. This is the hole the new fourth act fills. So yes, Control has changed. In every meaningful way, it is a better game 5 years later. There's more worth loving. It exists in a richer context. And yet, I am reminded that it did not need to change, to be worth returning to be remembered, to be relevant even now. I think I knew that, and perhaps you did too, the moment we first stepped through those doors. Control has burrowed its way into my mind, an invasive resonance compelling me to spread its signal. I'm happy to play the part. I love this game, because it's pretty, because it has such style, because I loved being Jessie, because it's fun, because there's nothing else quite like its destruction sandbox, because Control's rendering of the immortal fantasy it took to be its core is full and new and meaningful. Control speaks, with sight and play if not the story it guides you through. It's a new Narnia, and it's beautiful, and I mean that as wholly as I possibly could. And because I love it, forgiveness comes so easily to all the things I don't like about it. Within the body of a good game lies the spirit of one of the best I've ever played. I know that I'll remember it being better than it was, but when I return, I won't be disappointed. Special thanks go out to L. Hudson, Lex Williams, Andre Baltuta, Holy Shift, Dennis Williams, Combat Wombat, John Lemley, Dylan Schaefer-Murphy, Warthol, The Last Great Opium Den. How long do I need to make my username before Whitelight stops saying my name out loud? Dan Walker, Shinku, Caleb Finnemore, DJ, Chino, Chase Baker, G. Series, William Vossler, Joe Simmons, I Pay My Cam Girl So Why Not You, Arcturus, Navy Husky, Save, MT the Poet, Deluxo, Calvin Black, Dr. Pavel, Carlos Skibber, John C., Corey Walterbeek, Hadibari, Floyd Dibben, Monochrome Only, Ethan Seach, Jack, Connor Fraser, Milo W, Ray Cantwell, Joshua Carr, Purple PP, Pitslab, Joshua Lovejoy, Vedder, Cole Bramlett, Essel and Benefil the Doggo, Pappy, Lubos Thomas, Prudy, Whitelight Best Girl, Milo Adams, Creepers, Tentmaster Kafka, New XC, Very Professional Dodo, Douglas Totally Straight Up Anonymous Yo, Mark Carter, Nikita Shoshin, Dog Best Dog, I echolocate my husband using your voice, Nebulous Rascal, Ryan Green, Showbud, Bumble, Grumble, Double, Crumble, Bumhole, Pummel, Shovel, Puddle, Humble, Jumble. First try, you thought you fucking had me but you didn't. Tidemore, LA Lockwood, Sharp Got Burner.